Let's face it, traveling isn't always glamorous. Long lines, cramped seats, and the occasional flight delay can test anyone's patience. And while most of us brace ourselves for the usual inconveniences, sometimes the real turbulence happens before the plane even leaves the ground. This story begins in one such airport, a place where people from all walks of life cross paths. Among the sea of passengers that day was a man who seemed ordinary at first glance. A man like you or me, with a suitcase in one hand and a boarding pass in the other. But his journey was anything but ordinary. What he experienced that day wasn't just a case of bad service, it was something deeper, something that would leave a lasting impression on everyone involved. And here's the twist. This man wasn't just another traveler. His identity held a secret that would turn the tables in a way no one expected. Curious? You should be. Because when a flight attendant decided to test the limits of courtesy and professionalism, she had no idea who she was really dealing with. Stick around. You're about to witness a story that proves appearances can be deceiving, and respect should never be optional. It was just another routine flight from Atlanta to Chicago. One of those trips where passengers were lined up at the gate, each person tired but hopeful to get to their destination without any hiccups. Among them was Marcus, a calm, unassuming man in his early 40s. He wasn't loud or flashy, just someone blending in with the crowd. His outfit was sharp, yet modest, a navy blazer, a neatly pressed shirt, and polished shoes. Nothing about him screamed power, but there was something in his demeanor, something quiet about him, that suggested a depth of confidence that didn't need to be announced. As Marcus stepped onto the plane, he was greeted by Olivia, the lead flight attendant. She stood with the kind of poised authority that made her look like she ran the show. But as their eyes met, her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She glanced him up and down, sizing him up in a way that felt dismissive, as if she had already decided who he was before he even spoke. And then, without missing a beat, she asked him, "Are you sure you're in the right line?" "This isn't coach." Her words hung in the air, sharp and unexpected. It wasn't just the question, it was the tone. The subtle assumption that someone like Marcus, dressed so modestly, couldn't possibly belong in first class. It wasn't the kind of question one would expect from a seasoned professional, especially not from someone tasked with making passengers feel welcomed and valued. Marcus, momentarily caught off guard, didn't react with anger or frustration. Instead, he handed her his ticket without a word. The ticket that clearly read 1A, first class. But Olivia didn't apologize or offer any acknowledgement of the mistake. She simply glanced at the ticket, her lips tightening slightly, then stepped aside without a second glance. It was a small moment, but for Marcus it was the beginning of something that would spiral far beyond a simple boarding error. Little did Olivia know, this was no ordinary passenger. And soon, she would realize just how wrong she was. Marcus stood there for a moment, eyebrow raised, not in anger but in quiet amusement. His expression was almost one of disbelief as he glanced down at his ticket, then back at Olivia. Calmly, he responded, "I believe my ticket says 1A." His voice was even, measured, no hint of the frustration that someone else might have shown. He extended the ticket toward her once more, a simple gesture, but one that carried an unspoken weight. Olivia took one look at the ticket, and her lips tightened into a thin line. Without a word of apology or acknowledgement, she muttered, "Humph. Well, take your seat then." Her tone was flat, dismissive, as if Marcus had just inconvenienced her by showing up where he clearly belonged. She stepped aside, practically shooing him into his seat like an afterthought. At that moment, Marcus could have chosen to say something. He could have snapped back or demanded an explanation for her attitude. But he didn't. Instead, he simply nodded and made his way to his seat in first class, his composure still intact. The tension in the air, however, was thick enough to cut with a knife. A small moment, but one that left a lingering sense of discomfort between them. Now, you might think that would have been the end of it, right? A simple, awkward exchange and then everything would return to normal. But that wasn't the case. Olivia wasn't finished. As the boarding process continued, she seemed determined to remind Marcus, without a word, just how out of place she thought he was in that seat. Other first-class passengers received warm smiles, courteous greetings, and attentive service. But Marcus, he was practically invisible. No smile, no eye contact, no acknowledgement that he even existed. It was as if Olivia had decided to go out of her way to make him feel unwelcome, even though he had done nothing to deserve it. And then, it happened. Marcus, not wanting to make a scene, simply asked for a glass of water, a small, innocent request. But if you'd seen the way Olivia reacted, you might think he'd asked her to bring him a piece of the moon. She hesitated, her eyes narrowing slightly before she snapped, "Fine." And even then, the glass she handed him was barely filled. It was a clear signal she wasn't happy to be serving him, and she wasn't going to make it easy. At that moment, Marcus was beginning to understand that Olivia's behavior wasn't just a one-time slip-up. This was personal. But what could he do? The flight had just begun, and for now he was stuck in his seat, waiting to see if things would get better or worse. As the plane ascended, the cabin settled into its usual rhythm. The hum of the engines, the faint chatter of fellow passengers, and the soft clinking of trays being stowed away. But amidst all this, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. By now, he wasn't just observing the situation, he was analyzing it. Marcus wasn't some novice in the world of human behavior. Years of managing teams, navigating complex corporate landscapes, and dealing with all kinds of personalities had sharpened his instincts. He could tell when someone's attitude was about more than just a simple mistake. And what Olivia had shown him wasn't just rudeness, it was a deeper kind of disrespect. He could feel it in the way she looked at him, in the dismissive tone she'd used earlier, and in the way she continued to ignore him as if he were invisible. Marcus had faced far tougher situations before. He'd dealt with high-stakes negotiations, difficult clients, and even personal challenges that had tested his patience. But this was different. Here, thousands of feet in the air, he had a choice. He could have confronted Olivia immediately, called her out for her behavior, but something told him to wait. To let the storm brew just a little longer. He wanted to see how far she would push it. How far this woman would go before she realized the line she was about to cross. What Marcus didn't know, however, was that Olivia wasn't about to stop there. No, she was about to cross a line no one, no matter their position or power, should ever cross. An hour into the flight, the cabin had settled into its routine. The buzz of conversation had died down, and most passengers were quietly immersed in their own worlds. But Marcus, he remained alert, still acutely aware of the tension hanging in the air. So, when the time came for his meal, he simply made a polite request to Olivia, expecting the same level of service he had seen extended to the other passengers. But Olivia's response wasn't what he expected. She leaned in, fake smile plastered across her face, and in a clipped tone said, "You'll get it when I'm ready." And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving Marcus with an unsettled feeling in the pit of his stomach. As if to make a point, Olivia served everyone else in first class first. She moved swiftly from one passenger to the next, offering them their meals with the kind of efficiency that could have been admirable, if not for the sharp edge in her movements. Finally, when she returned to Marcus, it was clear that her patience had run out. She practically dropped the tray onto his table, the plate clattering against the surface. As she did, a glass of water spilled across the tray and splashed onto his lap. Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. Instead, he calmly wiped his pants with a napkin, his expression unreadable, a perfect mask of composure. But inside, the wheels were turning. How much more would she push? How far would Olivia go before she realized just how wrong she was? At this point, most people would have snapped. I mean, come on, who wouldn't? But Marcus didn't lose his temper. Instead, he simply looked at Olivia and asked in a calm, even tone, "Excuse me, ma'am, is there a problem?" And Olivia's response? It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even an excuse. Instead, she let out a sarcastic laugh, the kind that cuts deeper than any insult. She looked him dead in the eye and said, "No problem. Just making sure everyone knows their place. Now, if that doesn't make your blood boil, I don't know what will." Because right there, in that moment, Olivia made a dangerous mistake. A mistake that would come back to haunt her in ways she never expected. When the plane finally touched down in Chicago, it felt like a weight had been lifted. Passengers began to gather their things, ready to disembark and go about their business. The usual shuffle to exit, The push of tired bodies, the hum of overhead compartments being opened, but Marcus remained seated, calm and composed, as if the turbulence of the flight hadn't fazed him in the slightest. He waited until most of the passengers had exited, until the cabin was nearly empty. Then, without a hint of hesitation, he stood and made his way toward the front. Olivia, still bustling around the aisle, gave him a passing glance. She didn't even seem to notice him at first, but when Marcus spoke, her attention snapped to him. "I'd like to have a word with the captain," he said, his voice steady, even polite. Olivia didn't hide her disdain. Her eyes rolled in the most dramatic way possible, clearly uninterested in indulging what she must have assumed was just another complaint. "And why would the captain care what you have to say?" she scoffed, almost daring him to answer. But Marcus wasn't fazed by her attitude. Without a word, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. The card, sleek and professional, bore the airline's logo in bold print. He handed it to her. The action so simple, so calm, that it almost seemed like an afterthought. Olivia glanced down at the card and then back up at Marcus, but the smug look on her face quickly faded as she read the text. The words CEO and the company's name clicked in her mind with a horrifying clarity. Marcus smiled, his expression as calm as ever, and simply said, "Because as the new CEO of this airline, it's my responsibility to ensure all passengers are treated with respect." In an instant, Olivia's face drained of color. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She stammered, her hands shaking slightly as she tried to collect her thoughts. "I didn't," she muttered, barely able to get the sentence out. But Marcus raised a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "Save it," he said, his voice steady but firm. "I'll let your supervisor handle this conversation." What happened next would change Olivia's career forever. The next day, Olivia found herself sitting in a stark, sterile meeting room, nervously fidgeting with a pen as she waited for her supervisor and HR to arrive. The cold walls of the room seemed to close in around her, amplifying her anxiety. She had no idea what was coming. In fact, she was still processing what had happened just hours before. The shock of realizing who Marcus truly was. The man she had so casually dismissed, the man she had treated with such disdain, had turned out to be the very person who now held the reins of the airline. Marcus had filed a formal complaint. And he hadn't just mentioned the incident in passing, he had meticulously detailed every exchange, every moment, and every slight from the flight. It was clear that he wasn't just angry about how he had been treated, he was determined to address a systemic problem. But Olivia had no idea what to expect when she walked into that meeting room. What kind of consequences would she face for her behavior? When the meeting began, Olivia tried to keep her composure. Her supervisor and the HR representative sat across from her, the tension palpable in the air. But it was Marcus who spoke first, and his voice, calm and measured, carried weight. He wasn't there to gloat or to make her feel small. Instead, Marcus looked at her with a seriousness that commanded respect. "Olivia," he began, "I've had the opportunity to review everything that transpired during the flight." There was a pause, and she could feel the weight of his words. "But rather than call for your immediate dismissal, I'd like to suggest something else." Olivia's heart pounded in her chest. What could he possibly suggest after everything that had happened? Marcus took a deep breath and leaned forward slightly. "I'd like for you to attend mandatory training sessions on customer service and diversity awareness," he said. The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Olivia didn't know how to react. She had expected something harsher, something more punitive. But Marcus wasn't interested in revenge. He was interested in change. "Everyone deserves a chance to grow," Marcus continued, his tone firm yet compassionate. "But accountability comes first. We need to create a culture of respect here, not just for our passengers but for everyone on board, employees included. It wasn't about retribution. It wasn't about making an example of Olivia. It was about setting a standard, creating a culture that went beyond just policies and procedures. Marcus's decision was rooted in the belief that people could change if given the proper tools and the right kind of guidance. Olivia sat there, stunned into silence. She had expected to face consequences, perhaps even the end of her career at the airline. Instead, Marcus had offered her an opportunity to grow, to learn from her mistakes, and to become better at what she did. It was a decision that would not only affect Olivia, but would ripple throughout the airline, signaling a new era of accountability and respect. This story isn't just about one rude flight attendant or an unexpected CEO. No, it's about something much bigger. It's about the power of humility, patience, and the kind of leadership that doesn't seek to punish but to uplift. Marcus could have easily retaliated with anger, given the way he was treated. Who wouldn't? But instead, he chose to lead by example. He chose to embody the kind of leadership that values respect over retribution, patience over pride. And let's be honest, his decision wasn't just about teaching Olivia a lesson, it was about setting a tone for the entire company. As for Olivia, well, let's just say she won't be forgetting this flight anytime soon. The sting of her mistake will stay with her, but perhaps that's the point. Sometimes the hardest lessons are the ones we never see coming. And for Olivia, this flight was a turning point, one that could shape her career and her outlook on people, power, and professionalism. Remember, kindness costs nothing, but its impact? Priceless. In a world that often feels quick to judge or retaliate, it's worth taking a step back and choosing the higher road. So next time you find yourself in a challenging situation, think of Marcus and choose to rise above. Lead with grace, and you might just change more than you think. If you found this story inspiring, be sure to subscribe to the channel. We've got more stories that remind us of the good, the bad, and the lessons in between. So, hit that bell icon to stay tuned for more content that will leave you thinking long after the video ends.